Welcome back to Mackie Tech, everyone. And one of the big advantages of a UGREEN NAS is that you're not locked into UgreenOS, and you're free to install another operating system like a TrueNAS or Unraid or even OpenMediaVault. And so today we're going to walk through the installation and quick setup of OpenMediaVault on the UGREEN DXP2800, which is what I have right here. The DXP2800 features an Intel N100 quad-core CPU, 8 gigabytes of DDR5 memory, a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, and 2 M.2 NVMe slots. It also has multiple USB ports and an HDMI port, so this little 2-bay NAS is certainly no slouch. And just so you know, I purchased this DXP2800 and the two terabyte Seagate drives we're going to be using with my own money. And so this video is not sponsored, so everything you hear is going to be my honest take as always. So let's jump in. Like all UGREEN NASs, this DXP2800 ships with UgreenOS already installed, and it's on an internal eMMC card. And since I want to preserve that install, I'm going to be using a dedicated 256 gigabyte HP NVMe drive for the OMV installation. On this UGREEN NAS, the NVMe slots are actually located inside the drive bays right here versus on the bottom like other UGREEN NASs. So you're going to have to remove these in order to get at those. The NVMe drive slides into the M.2 connector at kind of a weird angle, so this is a little bit tricky to film, but luckily there is a handy tool-free latch that holds the drive securely, so we don't need to mess around with a screwdriver. And once the drive is in, we'll seat our 2 hard drives into their trays and slide them into the NAS. So first, we're going to download the latest ISO version of OpenMediaVault, which as of this recording is version 8.3, which is based on Debian 13 Trixie. The ISO will install OMV as the main operating system and give it a direct control over all the drives, the RAID, the networking, and everything else. I make a distinction of the ISO because OMV is often installed on top of Debian or other Debian-based systems like Raspberry Pi OS Lite. But since we're running the UGREEN NAS in a dedicated OpenMediaVault system, using the ISO gives us the cleanest and most straightforward setup. Anyway, once the ISO is downloaded, we'll flash it to a USB flash drive using Balena Etcher. Next, we'll connect the NAS to a monitor via HDMI, plug in our keyboard mouse USB dongle so we can get into the BIOS, and also our USB containing the OMV installer. We'll then power on the UGREEN, and when we see the UGREEN splash screen come up, we'll hold down the control and repeatedly tap the F2 key to get into the UGREEN's BIOS. Once in the BIOS, we'll need to first disable the UGREEN's Watchdog, which, if it's enabled, will automatically reboot the NAS after a couple minutes if it does not detect the native UgreenOS running, and we really would prefer that not happen during our installation of OMV. Next, we'll go into the BIOS NVMe configuration and make sure we can properly identify our target drive for the OMV installation versus the eMMC, which has the UgreenOS installed. This will be important later for the installation, so make sure you write down which is which. Next, make sure you're in the UEFI boot mode and then select USB drive as the first boot drive. Save your BIOS settings, let it reboot, and then select install from the OMV install window. Next, we'll go through the installer, selecting our location, preferred language, and keyboard layout. And then we'll give the NAS a host name, which is the name of the OMV system itself, so you can recognize it from the other devices on your network. We'll just leave ours as OpenMediaVault. For the domain name, we're going to leave it as internal, and then we'll create a password for the root account. And this is the admin password we'll use to sign in through the OpenMediaVault terminal or connect over SSH, not the password for the web interface. The web interface uses a completely separate admin account with different credentials, which we'll get to a little later. Next, we'll set our time zone, and then the installer will warn us that it has detected multiple drives within the system, which is expected. So we'll press enter to continue. Next is this slightly scary looking screen asking whether we want to force a UEFI installation. We'll need to select yes, so OMV installs its bootloader using the UEFI boot method we confirmed earlier in the UGREEN's BIOS. If you don't do this and select no, then NAS's BIOS will not detect the target drive as a boot source. Next, we're going to select our target drive for the OMV installation. So I'm selecting my HP 256 gig NVMe. Make sure you select the drive you set aside for OMV and not the internal eMMC containing the UgreenNAS. The selected target obviously is going to be completely erased during the installation, so double check it before continuing. And I know I'm bidding this home a lot, but I really don't want you to accidentally install over the UgreenNAS. After that, you may see a screen asking for an HTTP proxy. This screen actually appeared when I used the same installer on another computer, but not on the UGREEN. So don't worry if you never encounter this prompt. Most home networks don't really use HTTP proxies anyway, so just leave it blank and continue. So now the installer is finished, and we'll remove the USB disk from the NAS and reboot the system, but keep the NAS connected to your monitor so you can capture the OMV web IP from the terminal that we'll jump into in just a second. When you're at the login prompt, just go ahead and type in root as the username and then the password that you created earlier during the setup. Now, normally you should see an accurate OMV IP web address in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. In my case, my Ethernet connection wasn't detected when the screen appeared and the address shown here didn't refresh automatically. If that happens, just reconnect the Ethernet cable, wait a few seconds, and then run IPA or IP-4-BRADDR, and I'll leave all that in the description to see the current address of your OMV installation. This is really more of a network detection issue than anything that's going to happen during every installation, so just kind of be aware of that. So now we'll open a browser on another computer, and once in the browser, we'll type in our OMV IP address. And once at the prompt, the default admin credentials for OMV is admin as the username, all lowercase, and the password is OpenMediaVault, also all in lowercase. And once you're in, before you do anything, I would recommend changing your admin's password by clicking the profile icon in the upper right-hand corner, then click account, and then select password and type in your new web login password. Next, let's make sure to install any system updates by clicking System and Updates Management, and then selecting Updates. And you'll probably see a lot of updates here, so just click on the down arrow and let it complete the firmware updates. And you'll probably see a lot of these yellow confirmation banners that are kind of annoying with OMV during our walkthrough here. I'm not going to mention every one of them. Just make sure you click apply to save your changes. Next, we'll want to set up our drive pools. Now, I haven't used OMV in a while, so I was a little surprised that the release of OMV 7, the RAID controls were actually removed from the main interface and into their official plugin. So we need to install the multiple device or MD plugin first. So to install our RAID plugin, we'll click on System, Plugins, and then in the top right, type in MD or RAID and press Enter. And then we're looking for Linux MD plugin, and then we'll click on Install. If you're more of a ZFS person, you can certainly go through OMV Extras and look for OpenMediaVault ZFS plugin. ZFS handles the storage pool, redundancy, and file system all in one, using options like mirrors and RAID-Z. It's actually a pretty powerful system, but it requires a little bit more of a setup. So for this 2-drive build, we're just going to be sticking with the Linux MD to create a traditional RAID 1 mirror. So after the plugin is installed, we'll go ahead and create our mirrored RAID for our 2 disks by clicking on Storage and then Multiple Device, and then click the plus sign and select a mirror at the top. Then select our 2 disks and select Save. Now, normally you would create a file system after creating the RAID, such as ext4 or Btrfs. In my case, these drives were already part of the same RAID setup from a previous project. OMV detected the Btrfs file system, so I don't need to create a new one here. So once we've created the file system, from the same menu, we're going to click on the play button on the left, then select the file system you want to mount, and then click Save. Next, we'll create a user by clicking on Users, and then click on the plus sign, and then click Create. Then fill in all the fields, and we'll also check the box for the SSH group so the user can access the remote shell. And SSH is already enabled by default when you install OMV, so we don't have to worry about enabling it. But we do want to enable a few other systems, starting with rsync by clicking on rsync, then server, then modules, and then leave the port as 873 and click on enable. And then I'll also enable SMB/CIFS by clicking on SMB/CIFS under services and clicking enable. Next, we'll create a shared folder by clicking on storage, shared folders, and then clicking create, and then give it a name. Select our storage pool and give it a different relative path from the default if you'd like. Below that, you'll see the default permissions for the shared folder are read-write privileges for admins as well as users, but guests only have read permissions. If you want to select different permissions, click on the drop-down and select from the list and then click Save. Now let's make sure that we can actually access our drives we created. So we'll open our Finder on our Mac, select Network, and then double-click OpenMediaVault. Then we'll connect using the credentials for our user Smacky that we created earlier. Once we open the shared folder, we'll create a quick test folder to make sure we have write access and then copy over a few files. And there we go. Our OMV NAS is officially up and running. From here, you can create separate shared folders for backup, photos, personal files, or anything else you want to store on the NAS. And before we wrap up, there are a few additional plugins worth checking out. The first is OMV Extras, which I mentioned before, so you can have your ZFS if you want. It adds another collection of community-maintained plugins to OpenMediaVault. One of the most popular is the Compose plugin, which installs the Docker and lets you manage Docker Compose applications through the OMV interface. And that opens up the door for Jellyfin, Image, Nextcloud, and whatever other self-hosted apps that you might want. There's also the Backup plugin, which helps back up the OMV system itself, and Borg Backup if you want version compressed and encrypted backups of your data. I also like the CPU temperature plugin, which adds a handy temperature reading on the dashboard. And we didn't really go over the dashboard that much today, but that's an option you can peruse at your leisure. In addition to that, there are available 2FA plugins for another layer of security to the OMV web interface. You can also add the plugin for Claim AV, which is actually the same antivirus utility used on both TrueNAS and UGREEN Unfortunately, we're not going to have time to install any of these or run through any of them because that would be its own tutorial in of itself. But once you have the basic NAS working and up and running, you can certainly explore a lot of these and other plugins if you want to see what else is available for you. And that brings us to who OMV is really best for on the UgreenNAS. In my humble opinion, OMV is sort of like the happy middle ground between UgreenOS and TrueNAS. On one end, OMV is open source with tons of community support and more customizable than UgreenOS, but it's not as turnkey or as polished. On the other hand, OMV does feel more approachable than TrueNAS. Its plugin system makes it easy to add features, while TrueNAS offers more advanced built-in tools for things like ZFS, snapshots, replication, and larger storage environments. So if you want something more flexible than UgreenOS without jumping into the deep end of the pool with things like TrueNAS, OpenMediaVault is really a good way to start, especially if you enjoy tinkering like me or if you want a little bit more control over how your NAS works. And sound off in the comments if you've tried OMV on a UgreenNAS or if you prefer a different NAS OS or maybe a different NAS system altogether or maybe even a DIY setup, because I'd be interested to see what you're using. Anyway, that is going to wrap up this video, tech fans. If you found it helpful, please give us a like and make sure you're subscribed to Mackey Tech if you haven't done so already. As always, let me know any constructive feedback in the comments, and if you'd like to support me, consider joining the other tech fans on the channel or joining our free Patreon community where I will be posting my usual tutorial for this video. A special shout out to all of my Patreon supporters. You know who you are. And thank you all for watching. We'll be talking to you again very soon.